We are now on the hour. So welcome everyone to the first of today's live events. We are going to have a trunk show with four very talented quilters. I'm going to ask them each to just briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into it. So the order you're in on my screen is Leanne, Kellie, Kim, Celeste. So just your 30-second pitch, Leanne.
All right, I am Leanne Parsons of Devoted Quilter, and I'm coming to you today from Newfoundland, Canada. We have a little bit of snow on the ground, but not very much yet. Not enough to snowshoe on, so I'm waiting for more. I'm now excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're excited to have you. Thank you. And Kellie.
I'm Kellie. We have a small machining business here in Mission, British Columbia, and we decided to start making machine quilting rulers due to a new addiction. And that's about it. The weather here is dark still. So
lots of praise for those rulers in the Facebook group this morning as well.
Good. Yay.
Kim, how about you?
I'm Kim Brownell, known as the Wacky Doodle Quilter. I'm come from the Sacramento area of California, and we've been bright and sunny and actually in the 60s all week. So I'm surprised. Usually it's much colder this time of the year, so it's kind of warm.
Amazing. Okay, excellent. And finally, Celeste.
Hi, I'm Céleste Compion from Elora, Ontario in Canada. My business is Mia Kaczmarek, and I'll be chatting about that in the trunk show. I'm delighted to be here for the second year.
Excellent.
Thank you, Bea, for all your organization. It's amazing.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, and I'm so glad you could come back. So, and in fact, Celeste is going to be kicking us off, and I am Bea Byrne. I am here in very sunny Oakland. I've got ridiculous sunshine behind me, where it's already very warm again after the new year. I'm going to start sharing the deck and put it into slideshow mode. There we go. And here we are, and I'm going to hand over to Celeste. So Celeste, take us away.
Thank you very much, Bea, and hello everybody who's out there. This is just a very silly thing. My mom spelt my name with a little accent on the E, and not all software allows me to put it in, so this didn't allow it. Just a little nod to my mom. I am a shweshwe and quilting addict since the 80s. And we moved to Canada in 2001, where I taught in a high school first, but then in 2013, I started importing shweshwe from South Africa, and I sell it online and also in my studio by appointment. So I'm really lucky. I used to just sew in the basement next to the washing machine and the dryer. But then we built a building on our property so that my husband has a workshop downstairs. And this was supposed to be storage for his wood, but I annexed it and I'm not getting out. So I have a brilliant working space. I never in my life thought I would have such a space. And it's big enough to teach in and to run a little shop. So I thought I should tell you, what shweshwe is, because there may be people who don't know about shweshwe. It's 100% cotton that's made in South Africa, but the production was something that had started in the 1850s in Manchester, in England, and it was sold all over the colonies. But in 1992, so from the 1850s to 1992, this was a product made in England and sold all over the world. But it became indigenized in South Africa because ethnic people used it for their tribal customs. And in 1992, a South African company bought the rights from the mother company. It's now South African. They do everything the same way as during the Industrial Revolution. These fabrics are made on 36-inch wide looms. They are discharge printed. I'm not going to go into detail about that. I present a more detailed trunk show giving this history. And they have a back stamp. And all of these things date back to early calicos. This is a heritage product. What's really exciting is that the company that has taken it over has moved with the times. They only use locally sourced raw cotton, so it's ethically sourced cotton. They do profit sharing with their employees. And you know that dyeing and printing is really bad on water consumption. They recycle all the water they use in this facility, and it gets used for agriculture around the factory. So if you want to know more, I do present more details. So I'm going to give you a little bit more about seeing quilting stuff. So I kit the fabric and I write patterns to give people ideas. And so I'm just going to show you a few of my favorites. The Loosey Goosey table runners and the Disappearing 9-patch table runners. And my attitude is I want people not to be intimidated by a pattern. I want them to look at a pattern and say, oh, I can do that. I don't want people to think, oh my goodness, I need to be a specialist. So I also, oops, that jumped. Two of my favorite bed size quilts are the Chakalaka Throw and the Strippy HST. The Chakalaka is named for a hot spicy sauce, hence the color. And you get the recipe for the sauce when you purchase this kit. The Strippy HST quilt is all quilted by hand because that's my passion. And it has been to Houston. I haven't been to Houston myself to the quilt show yet, but that quilt has been there. So I'm quite excited about that. The Limpopo Throw and Meerkat Paws Throw are also very popular kits and patterns. Limpopo is the river that runs along the northern border of South Africa. And as most rivers are in Africa, they're pretty muddy. They'll flood for a certain time of the year, and then they're brown and muddy. My dad used to say, if you jump into the Limpopo, when you get out, you have to dust yourself off. And so that pattern is inspired by the meandering Limpopo River full of mud. The Meerkat Paws Throw is a little game, you know, it's an old design that's been expanded and playing with the name of my business. More favorite kits. So these ones are a little, I must be honest, a little bit look more challenging because they have triangles in them, but they're not complicated. They are fun to do, and they're all about being as bold as possible with color. Nguni is the name of all the tribes in Southern Africa. So there's Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, Ndebele, but that group of people is called the Nguni people. And so I've borrowed from Nguni designs to make this Nguni Dreams throw pattern. So part of what I do is I visit guilds, and I also do online presentations around the world, in fact. The most popular one is the Bold and the Beautiful, the Shweshwe saga. So that little bit that I gave you on slide 1, I expand that and tell the history of this amazing fabric that still survives to this day. My other trunk show is Mending is Good for the Soul, and that connects with the free class that is included in Quilt and Learn this year. I am a passionate hand stitcher. And so I love doing hand work. And then the other trunk show and a class that kind of go together is my Quilty Color Journey. I am not trained in color. I'm not trained in art. When all the other kids were doing art in high school, I went and did Latin. But I love color and I love math. And so I've been teaching myself about color. And so this is what this trunk show and the class is about, is to encourage people not to be daunted by color and not to feel intimidated because you don't have an art background. It's quite a popular class that I have taught at Quilt Canada in Halifax. So other classes, oops, it keeps on jumping. I'm pushing too hard. There we go. Other classes that I teach online or in person are Afrogami Purse, which is a link between origami and African print, Afrogami. So you fold this little square up and you make a bag. Or the Afro-chic arm bag, which is basically Japanese folded patchwork. And the Equinox throw and Equinox table runners, you learn to do wonky strip piecing and machine applique. Fun to do either big or small scale. And then my passion, reverse applique. This quilt on the left is the Dutch Treat quilt, designed by Judy Garden. There was a book that she wrote in 2004, and I discovered it way later and discovered that she used indigo shwe for her book. So I ditched my Dear Jane book and I jumped into the Dutch Treat book, and it took me 7.5 years to do those squares by hand, plus the border, and I was delighted that it won Viewer's Choice at my local guild. And I teach reverse applique, both with traditional and with modern designs. And then I've been making a load of little scrappy rice bags as gifts, and it connects also to the presentation in Quilt and Learn, because there's a lot of boro stitching involved with the scrappy rice bags. And that's me. You're welcome to ask questions, and I don't know how you're going to do that, Bea. I hand over to Kellie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Let me just quickly turn my video back on. Gosh, that last quilt, the reverse applique one, that was astonishing. Thank you so much for sharing that. We didn't have any questions into the Q&A, so I think we will move on. But if anyone does have any questions, then do put them in, and we can always come back. So yes, let's hand straight over to Kellie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celeste. I'm in awe. I really am. So again, my name's Kellie. I started Silly Moon Quilting Co. Oh gosh, I guess about 5-6 years ago. And it started out of a necessity to find something to do after my kids all moved out, and unfortunately my mother passed away from Alzheimer's, and now all of a sudden I had all this time. So I started quilting. Dear friend got me started, loved quilting, fell in love with it, was so addicted. And once I kind of started quilting, it kind of went down a rabbit hole, I guess we'll say. And everything with our family, we kind of joke that everything becomes an obsession and everything turns into a business. And there's pros and cons. That's another whole class altogether about turning your hobby into a business. But for today, we're going to talk about rulers. And I have trouble with things like this. And I told Bea before, just tell me to stop talking, because anyone that's ever taken a class with me knows that we always go over time. So I'm going to try and do this quickly. So I want to start by showing you the quilts that started it all and started this path. So the quilt with the hearts, my sister-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer, and there was nothing I could do. She lived across the country. I couldn't go and bake food for her, bring her meals, or any of the things we tend to want to do to help people when they're in that situation. So I discovered that I could make a quilt. So this was the very, very first quilt that I ever made. Well, there's a little bit of a caveat. I did try another one. It didn't end so well. So this was the first quilt that got finished. It was a rag quilt, and from there I thought this was amazing, great way to quilt, and everyone in the household, of course, got rag quilts. Then after some experimenting with piecing and fighting with a really old Bernina 801 Sport sewing machine that had a very, very small throat, my husband and I, we decided to invest in a long arm. And the idea behind the long arm was we were going to, my husband has always worked for himself. I was going to start quilting other people's quilts and moving into that aspect to maybe take some of the pressure off of him. He could sort of semi-retire. Well, that didn't work at all, because I realized then how much work went into quilts, and there was no way I was touching someone else's quilt and messing it up. So I kind of backed off on that. But this picture here is the very first quilt that I ever long-armed. Many of you may know there was a really tragic bus accident in Humboldt, Saskatchewan many years ago. This was the first quilt that I made, a disappearing 9-patch, and quilted and gave away as a charity quilt. It holds a special place in my heart. Both of these do. And they started me on my journey. So after, excuse me, after that, whoa, it does jump ahead. You're right, Celeste. So after that happened, with my long arm came some rulers. I wasn't super happy with the rulers that came with it. As I said, my husband has a business, a CNC shop, machining shop. So we ended up, he said, I can make those for you. He made some rulers, which I needed to A, do perfect circles, and B, do straight lines, because I could do neither on my domestic machine or on my long arm. So he made me a couple rulers. He made me a cheesy ruler. We had a lot of fun coming up with names. So our cheesy ruler, and then he made a couple straight edge different rulers, stitching in the ditch rulers. And that was kind of just for me when we started. And I was having a lot of fun with them. Then we came up with a fun name, just because why not? We're going to make them. Let's throw a name on them. And then I showed them at the guild and blah, blah, blah. And from there, this was my very first time in the real world showing off my product at a quilt show in Chilliwack, which is about an hour from where I live in BC. And I learned so much. And that's the biggest thing I think about the business and working a small business, is learning everything. And I always kind of joke that when I started this business, I knew nothing about social media. The only social media I had was my Facebook account that allowed me to monitor my children. That was it. So everything that social media, website, everything has been a huge learning curve. So I totally appreciate the issues you're having with your computer, Kim. So this was our very first quilt show. We did some samples. That was the number of rulers we had at first. It was a little bit crazy compared to now. I don't even know how many I have now. I should know that. I always get asked. And then we decided to start a business, and that was a big thing for me. And with the business came having to provide samples for people so that they know what the rulers do, because if someone looks up online and sees turkey and thinks, what the heck does a turkey ruler do? We came up with some samples, and then we've added some PDF files to our website so that people can kind of get a general idea. And then, of course, we blossomed into the YouTube world. My YouTube videos are by far not production, and they will get the point across, but that's about it, I think. So then we moved into this business was going to include everyone else in the house, and I think every one of us knows that we all can't make quilts without a quilt holder. This was another quilt that I did on my long arm. Again, pretty easy quilt to piece, and I had a lot of fun. It was for one of my daughters. I have two daughters who are both my giant cheerleaders, and my husband, of course, who stands beside me and makes sense of the horrible drawings I make of our rulers and turns them into the magic that you see with the rulers that we have available now. So I like to show this quilt because it shows the combination of ruler work as well as free motion. And I'm a big proponent of just play with free motion, play with quilting, play with techniques, play with thread, because that's how you're going to get better and you're going to find something that you love. Quilts for a reason. I think most of us as quilters, we make quilts for a reason, or at least that's how I started, as I said earlier. Both of these pictures here were quilts for a reason. One was a very lovely celebration of a couple, my niece getting married. The other one was something that could comfort her when she was going through her cancer treatment. So again, both quilts for a reason. I tend to sometimes make a quilt designed around the rulers, where I know a lot of people will make a quilt and then decide how to quilt it. I often will pull out a ruler, usually the newest one or two, and go, okay, I want to play with this ruler. What quilt can I make that's going to complement that? And in the case of the X's and O's one, it worked quite well because we used our drop ruler to quilt that, and it worked quite nicely to create that consistency in each of the blocks. This is absolutely one of my favorite quilt photos forever. My oldest daughter is amazing at social media photography. She's just a whiz. She is incredible. And I'm so lucky to have her to bounce things off. And she took this photo when we were on a family holiday. And it's funny because this was a quilt. One of the first quilts I did, I had a bundle of Tula pink fabric. There was no pattern. This was the first one I kind of sketched out and drew on my own. And yes, it's a very simple pattern, but it's simply fat quarters cut up and then some fun playing with rulers. And it was just such a blast. And it's such a well-loved quilt. It's been washed probably 200 times, and it still is just one of my daughter's absolute favorites, which is pretty special. Oh, clicking. Now I'm clicking too slow. There we go. This was another quilt where, again, and I like to show this one. Oh, there was a pattern used. That slide is wrong. I apologize. And I forget the name. If you need to message me, I can get you the name of the quilt pattern, but there is a definite pattern. Brittany, I believe, is her name. But I like to show this quilt because I like to show that you can combine ruler work and free motion. And a lot of times when we're quilting things, it comes down to how much time we have. This one I started for Christmas a few years ago, and I believe it was actually done for Christmas, which in my world is a pretty amazing thing. But I did some pretty heavy quilting on the truck, and then the other part of the quilt was pretty quickly meandered so that it would actually end up under the tree. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. I love this quilt. I love quilting, period, don't we all? Okay. And then I like to encourage people to start small. A lot of people will look at ruler quilting and go, I can't do that. I can't quilt a queen size quilt on my domestic machine. And yeah, maybe at first you can't, but I really want to encourage people to try smaller projects. And something as simple as a pillow or a snowflake quilt or a little bag. All of these, you can do simple ruler quilting or you can expand that. So here's just a simple snowflake. It was a really easy pattern. I did some echoing of the trees and then a simple pattern. The second one here is it's a flower pattern by Retro Quilter. Sally Tomato, a little bag. I put a whole bunch of little clamshells and then I quilted the top. So you can kind of put in your ruler quilting practicing anywhere. And I tend to kind of find bags or purses. I'm a lot more about the smaller projects now because they need to get done and photographed and be up, and making a queen size quilt doesn't always end up in my my wheelhouse of time. We really found a need for quilting quickly overall designs, but having something other than straight line quilting. So the very first ruler we did with this was our twisty ruler. And I'll be honest, I sat on that ruler for ages. It sat here, it was done. I tested it. I'd had it tested by other people, and it sat here for ages because I didn't release it thinking nobody would use it. Boy, was I wrong. It is by far our #1 seller. And now we've kind of moved into a lot of people really liking the overall design because it allows you to create that edge-to-edge design that you would get at a long arm quilter at home, either on your domestic machine or on your sit-down long arm, or even on your long arm if you don't want to use a pantograph or if you don't have a computerized machine. It just gives you some quick finishes to help you get that nice overall design and texture. And you can change that up really well by playing with thread. Again, that's my 2025 project, playing with different threads. I do love to share my ruler quilting. I love teaching. Back from when I was a teenager, I coached swimming and I loved it. I loved coaching. I loved teaching kids. They wanted to learn. I quit because I hated the parents. Sorry. I know we've all been that hovering parent. Didn't like it at all. But now when I teach quilting, it's great because anyone that chooses to take a class, they want to be there and they want to learn. And that is 100% what I love to do. So we have our beginner class. If you're part of the VIP program, you actually get that class for free. And then we have a bunch of other classes on our website. I'm not going to bore you all with all those. You can certainly see any of those classes. And I teach classes and workshops to guilds, and I do talks to guilds as well. Last year we had, the big quilt was our 2023 quilt along. No, yes, 2023. And then we had a 2024 quilt along. And I'm
Sorry,
not doing one
Kellie,
this year.
I'm just giving you a 2-minute warning.
Oh,
Thank you
perfect.
very
Well,
much. Keep
I'm going to
going.
actually be on time. Wow, this is crazy. So this is my trick with the quilt-alongs is one small set of rulers or a couple rulers. So this big one here, we did it all with 2 rulers. We did it with our cheesy ruler and our straight edge ruler, Edgy 6. That's it. So these are all just some designs to inspire you with different ruler quilting. All of this can be found on my social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, yada, yada, yada. Woo! And I'm sorry, Kim, I'm clicking all the way through your stuff too. There we go. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me.
Wonderful. Wow. Okay. That was a lot. I clearly I don't know, I feel like I'm the last person to learn about rulers and to start using them in my quilting. But as I mentioned in the chat, it's one thing I definitely want to learn this year. But that was amazing. Thank you so much.
I can hook you up, B.
Um, and I'm going to hand over to Kim.
Thank you, Bee. I'm Kim Brownell. I'm known as the Wacky Doodle Quilter. That's because I have this weird way of looking at the world. I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit and tell you about my background. I came pretty late to quilting. I started learning to sew in 1993. I was about 32 years old. My family, my mother, my aunts, grandmothers, they never sewed or quilted. They knew how, but they never did. So I grew up not knowing anything about, I couldn't even tell you how that there was a bobbin in the machine that hooked the thread around and sewed. I learned from the very beginning. But I loved looking at the quilts and I loved wearable arts. So I jumped into quilting. I started with traditional, as most quilters do. And I bow to Céleste, who has wonderful, wonderful traditional work and handwork. I have the patience of a gnat. So my traditional quilting ended pretty quickly. In fact, I don't think I own any of my traditional quilts. My daughter owns one that I made for her when she was 3, and the rest have either been donated or gifted. What I found my specialty is art quilts. I like to create different things based on inspirations from all over the world. This particular one is called Look Through My Eyes, and it is actually based on a piece of my daughter's artwork, and she's an art major. She had an assignment in high school, and she was supposed to produce in any art form she wanted. And she's a drawer. She does colored pencil, digital drawing, which I will tell you, I am not a drawer. I can't hold a candle to her. But anyways, I saw what she did, and she took the issue of deforestation, which was the issue she chose, and decided to look at the progress through the eyes of the person and the tiger. In the person's eyes, we see the progress of the cities being built, and in the tiger's eyes, we see the deforestation and the burning of the forests. So I chose to go ahead and do that one as my to do a quilt of, and I did ask her. So I do have permission of the artist, but she said, "Mom, I want you to let everybody know this is my design." I said, "I sure will." So this is her design, although I have her permission. So here is my quilt version of it. And what I did was I went ahead and used shears over the eyes to bring out the design. And that brings me to another thing I love to do, along with looking at inspiration, artworks, everything around the world. I also like to take patterns and meld them into other patterns and shrink them way down. I don't do large quilts. I started out when I did traditional quilts and doing large quilts, but I find I don't finish them. They end up in my sewing room as a UFO, and then they end up on the free table at the guild. I just don't finish them. Like I said, I have the patience of a gnat. So I found if I work smaller, that I actually finished everything. So that's what I tend to do now. So even though I love some of those great big patterns, I tend to shrink them down when I go ahead and do them. You'll recognize these cats as Helene Knott's Garden Patch Cats. And I wanted to go ahead and shrink. I had about 14 of them, and I wanted to use them all in the same quilt, but I didn't want to make them block after block. I have a real problem with doing the same thing over and over and over again. So what I did was I shrunk them down, put them in Melinda Beulah's fruit bowl pattern from her book, and made them just a bowl of cats. At first, I thought I was going to be a fruit bowl, but then I realized there were more vegetable cats than fruit cats. So now they're tossed salad of cats. And that brings me to a third of my loves, which is challenges. If you present me with I will try to do whatever challenge I come across. Sometimes I have 50 challenges in a year that I have on my list. Believe me, I only make it through probably about 10, but I've got a bunch on my list. I love challenges. And this particular one is a crow, and I decided to do him based on an incident that happened in my life when my daughter was about 7, and me and my husband and daughter went to the Point Reyes seashore. We had a Tinkerbell antenna ball on our car, which was shaped like a Tinkerbell. It wasn't ball shaped. And when we came back to the parking lot, the Tinkerbell antenna ball was gone. So I am standing there thinking, who on earth would steal a Tinkerbell antenna ball? Well, the culprit was right in the pine trees above us with it in his or her beak. And so now we know. I suspect that Tinkerbell antenna ball has been handed down from generation to generation in that crow's family. This one's called the Quilt Shuffle, and this one brings me to another one of my big ways that I work in the world that makes me wacky is I have a tendency to be a big risk taker. I don't think I've come across too many other people that take as big of risks in their quilting as I do. This particular one was for a challenge, and the challenge was called Reflections and Visions. And it was you could either do traditional quilt or an innovative quilt. Well, I decided to meld the two, and I've got the paper pieced blocks, the traditional blocks. But to me, innovative, what could we do to make quilting innovative that hasn't been done yet? We could make it interactive. So I really wanted to make an interactive quilt that would hang at quilt shows and people could design their own quilts, which is do the quilt shuffle, shuffle the pieces around and make your own quilt. Well, I went ahead, I did this. This is a grid, it's not a background. And I went ahead and I put Velcro on the pieces and on the intersections to work that. And I put a big sign at the quilt show I entered it in that explained it was an interactive quilt. Feel free to move the pieces around. Nobody would touch that quilt. We have people trained well. Let me tell you, I even tried to convince people to move it around. Nobody would. Nobody would touch it. Oops. Now there's me going, and how do I go back? Let's see, I'm not getting it. It's asking me to do an annotation instead of a,
Oh, do you go backwards? Hang on, let's go
I
slide
can,
control.
but normally I do, but the arrows
Let me see whether it'll let me.
erased. That's forward.
Oh, hang on. Let me
Okay.
oh, sorry, it's going all
That's
over.
okay. No worries.
Let me go to Escape this. There we go. Right. Which one do we want to go back to? The
Fairies. Yeah.
There we are.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Now it's back.
Perfect.
Um,
All right.
Okay, my fairies book is another experiment I had. I wanted to make a cloth book, and I love collage work. I love just putting things together and making my own pictures. Another thing I love is embellishments. I put embellishments all over everything. So what I did was I just went ahead and I had a bunch of fairy things collected. And I wanted to just make a fairies book. So I cut it in the shape of a butterfly. The book is about 8 pages long. And what I did was I collaged both sides, and then I tied them, I put the eyelets down the center and took ribbon and wound it through. And I went ahead and added all the embellishments in. And this travels with me to guilds and lectures all over the place, and people love looking at the book. I let people handle it all the time, and it has held up for about, oh my gosh, I've had it about 12, 13 years, and it holds up fine. Another thing I do is repurpose. I love to repurpose stuff. This was a UFO. I had taken Rosemary Eichhorn's wearable art vest class, and it sat in my UFO bin for years. But I really liked the way it was coming out, but I didn't want to make a vest anymore. So I just simply cut it up into pieces and made it into a triptych. One of the classes I teach and one of my specialty techniques is quilted jigsaw puzzles. This is Sunrise Sunset. It's my own pattern. And what it is it's an easy stained glass technique. No bias tape involved. And another class I teach, one of my newer ones, is Fun and Stress-Free Art Quilts, where we pick a focal fabric and we build the whole thing right around a focal fabric. These are some fun small classes and demos I do. These are fabric greeting cards. You'll see my repurposing is going on here with the shells. This is my fabric scrap ornaments, and this is a pattern and a class I teach, a 3-hour class. And these are addictive and fun to make, I will tell you. And this is Artful Memories. It's a demo I do where you can take a piece of old jewelry from a grandmother or mother, and we can make a nice display piece for you to put it out on your mantle or wherever and look at it instead of stuck in the bottom of your jewelry box. Again, this is where I go into my risk taking. These are other pieces that include other parts besides just fabric. This is actually painted wood, and I've went ahead and fused down the fabric into the pattern. This is my own pattern, and it is not decoupaged. These are actually fused onto the painted wood. This is metal. This is copper. I've used copper. I've used gold mesh. I cut up a soda can, and I've learned how to sew it down onto fabric. It is a bit of a technique, but it's actually kind of fun to do. And I always end with this quilt by Flying Pig. He's my mascot because I believe anything is possible. And I want to thank you for joining me and my fellow quilters in our slideshow, in this Bees Quilt and Learn slideshow today.
Oh, thank you, Kim. That was fantastic. That flying pig is just delightful. And oh my goodness, so many different experiments. The quilt you build yourself, the fairy book, the cat salad though, that was the one that really was making me laugh. I absolutely loved that. Thank you. So
You're
thank you so much. And we are going to hand over to Leanne. So Leanne, you should have slide control. There we go. And over to you. Kim, thank you.
All right. Well, I am happy to be here. And I have to say, this is so much fun to do because one of the things I love about quilting is how there's so many different ways to do things. And that's really obvious when you get 4 people presenting their quilts in 1 hour and everything is so drastically different. So this is really cool. So the workshop that I am teaching this weekend is paper piecing with freezer paper. And so for this trunk show, I thought I would share my paper pieced quilts because, you know, they go really well with the workshop. So all of the patterns for these quilts that I'm going to be sharing today are available in my shop, and my shop is devotedquilter.etsy.com, or you can just go to devotedquilter.com and you will see a link to the shop there. So this quilt here is Burst, and Burst is one of my most popular patterns. It's also one of the VIP downloads this weekend. So if you have the VIP pass, then you can download the Burst pattern. So I really love scrappy quilts. I think they're a lot of fun, and I really love to throw all of the colors together in my scrappy quilts, like I did here with Burst. So I'll often use just a solid color for the background because I find that that kind of tames the crazy a little bit, because with all the colors and all the different prints and everything, scrap quilts can tend to be a little bit crazy. So I really like to use a solid background. I also really love free motion quilting. So this quilt is a little bit of a rare one for me because it's quilted with a spiral using my walking foot. I very rarely use my walking foot for quilting, but I did for this one. I do all of my own quilting on my Janome 6700, so that's a domestic machine. No long arm for me. This one is Standout Starburst. It's actually the other one of my VIP downloads. So again, if you have that VIP pass, you can download this one. It's another scrappy quilt, and I really love the shapes that are made in it in the negative space. So I really love quilts that give that secondary design when you put your blocks together, and have a bit of fun with that one. I also really love using black backgrounds for my quilts with bright colors. I really love how that makes the colors pop. And so you're actually going to see that a few times in these quilts. Standout Starburst is my cover girl quilt. It's the only time a quilt that I've made has been on the cover of a magazine. You see here it's on Make Modern magazine. I really love Make Modern magazine, and I always say that's not only because they put my quilt on the cover once, but they always have some really great interviews and articles. So if you've never heard of them, they're a great one to check out. Oh, now I'm going too fast. Let's get me back here. No, we're going all over the place. There we go. So this is Hollow Jewels. This is the first quilt that I ever made with freezer paper for the paper piecing. And I was seriously amazed by how much of a difference that made. I always hated ripping out pieces of paper at the end of making my blocks. So when I discovered that you didn't have to do that with freezer paper, I was sold. I have never looked back. I used to work in childcare, and the colors for this quilt were actually inspired by a sweater that one of the kids wore one day. His mom had brought it back for him from Peru. It was handmade in Peru. It was an absolutely beautiful sweater with these gorgeous colors. And so I ended up needing to take a picture of his sweater so that I could hold on to that inspiration so that it would someday make it into a quilt. This is 50-50, and I always say this is what happens when you take two quilt blocks, you cut them in half, and then you recombine them together. It's a fun quilt, maybe a little bit crazy, but I really like this one. When I do my free motion quilting, I usually will start, I know how I want to quilt one section, and so I do that first part and hope that by the time I finish that first part, I figured out how I want to quilt the second part. That's what I was doing with 50-50. And when I got partway through, I realized that if I finished the sections that I was working on, I'd have half of the sections of the quilt quilted. So that felt like a great place to stop. So in the quilt, the gray, the dark teal, and the orange are quilted, and the black, the light teal, and the yellow are not. So that seemed like, for a quilt called 50-50, having it 50% quilted seemed like a good idea. This is Hot and Cold, and it's my modern take on the traditional pineapple block. It's also the quilt where I discovered that there is a limit for reusing your freezer paper templates. Every one of those pineapple blocks has 29 pieces. And so as you can imagine, that's a lot of pressing on those templates. And so I found that I could reuse a template to make 4 blocks before all of that pressing on that freezer paper would make it stop sticking. So I was pretty impressed. I mean, that's over 100 times pressing that freezer paper before it gave out. So that's pretty good. This is another one of my quilts that has the bright colors on a dark background. This is Medallion Magic, and it's my son Nathan's favorite quilt. So he really loves that this one hangs in our living room so that he gets to see it all of the time. I designed Medallion Magic in about 2016, 2017. I was seeing on Instagram a lot of people were sharing their medallion quilt blocks. There was one particular medallion that was really popular at the time. And I found that no matter what fabrics people had used for their blocks were gorgeous. But then when they put the quilt together, everything was so close together that I found it was really cramped and crowded, and I didn't like any of the quilts. So I decided I was going to design a medallion where everything had a bit of breathing room. There was some space between the parts of the blocks, and Medallion Magic was the result of that. And in Medallion Magic, the flying geese are actually paper pieced because they are not the traditional twice as wide as they are tall size. So they're a little easier to do if you do them with paper piecing. And we're jumping ahead again. This thing is very, no, I went too far back. There we go. Intersections. This one gets its name from all the places where the diagonal lines intersect in the quilt. In this quilt, it's only those center yellow V's that are paper pieced. I find it really fun to combine techniques in a quilt. So some of my quilts are paper piecing and traditional piecing, or paper piecing and applique, or traditional piecing and applique. So it's just fun to put things together that way. With all the diagonal lines in this quilt, it was really easy to do the free motion quilting and start on one edge of the quilt and quilt all the way along to another edge of the quilt. So there was very little stopping and breaking thread for the quilting designs. So it really made it very quick to go through and do all of that free motion quilting. For points of connection, there are a lot of places in this quilt where the different shapes touch each other, but there's actually very few points where you have to match them up, which I feel like that's always a bonus because no matter how long we've been quilting, we always have trouble with getting those points to match up the way that we want them to. So it's kind of fun to have a quilt where you really don't have to worry about that. I like to paper piece my square and a square blocks. I find they're one of those blocks that's just really hard to do well with traditional piecing methods. They like to come out to be a bit wonky, or you kind of lose your points or whatever. So with paper piecing, you really know that they're going to turn out well, they're going to be the right size, and your points will stay pointy. Now, I know we're just past Christmas. You've probably got your Christmas stuff put away, but I have to share my Merry Mini quilt. This is a really fun pattern to make. It's scrappy and it's quick because, again, it's mini. I really love mini quilts when you want to do something quickly. It's just fun to do something that's not going to take you weeks to piece everything together. The pattern for Merry Mini says to do hand embroidery for that Merry Christmas in the center, but I've actually also done it with fabric markers and I've done it with crayons, and it works really well with either one. So if hand embroidery is not your thing, you can definitely still make a Merry Mini quilt. And I did a Christmas in July quilt along with the Merry Mini pattern last year. So all of those posts are still up on my blog if you wanted to make your own Merry Mini and get some tips and hints and actually see my crayon and fabric marker ones. The last paper pieced pattern is Level Up. A friend suggested the name for this one because she said the shapes reminded her of Level Up, or of Power Ups, sorry, in video games. And I find naming quilts is one of the worst parts of being a pattern designer. I always joke that if I wasn't trying to put them in stores and sell them, that most of my quilts would be called something like the blue one or that one I made for Dad. But if you're going to have them in a shop, then they really have to have a name. And so I often end up reaching out to friends and trying to get some suggestions. The stars in Level Up are striped. And if you've ever tried to do paper piecing with a directional fabric, you know it can be an absolute nightmare. But I really wanted to put those stripes on those stars. So I took the time and I figured out how to position it. And so then once I had all of that figured out so that I knew how to have it so that when I opened up the paper piece, the stripes would be going in the right direction, I added that all to the pattern. So now anybody who makes the stars for the Level Up pattern, they can have their stripes going the same direction too if they want to use stripes. And this is my last quilt that I will share. Not all of my patterns are paper pieced. Actually, a lot of my patterns don't have any paper piecing at all. So I'm finishing off here with Scraps Take Flight. It is a super scrappy pattern. When the Modern Quilt Guild had a scrappy challenge for their for QuiltCon, I think it was last year, one of the stipulations for the quilts being entered for that challenge was that they had to use 30 fabrics. Well, I counted up the fabrics. I started counting the fabrics, I should say, in Scraps Take Flight, and I hit 30 before I got out of the top row. So I didn't actually count the rest, but I was very amused to see how many I had. I think there's probably one or two that are repeated in the butterfly wings, but I was really aiming to have no repeats in those wings. And so most of them are different. I really love scrappy quilts, so I keep my scraps organized. They're mostly in shoe boxes, and they're separated by color. For a long time, my scraps were not organized, which was a real mess. For a long time, they were just jammed together in plastic grocery bags, which, as you can imagine, made it really hard to find what I wanted. So when I figured out the idea of separating them by color and gave up on the idea of having fancy containers for them and just went with the empty shoe boxes we had lying around, it made it so much easier to be actually able to use my my scraps and to have them easy to access. So I have a PDF guide if you wanted to get your scraps organized in a way that works for you. The guide is called Escape Scrap Overwhelm. And if you go to devotedquilter.com, there will be a little pop-up that will come up that will actually ask if you want to download that guide. So thank you, Bea, for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me stop the sharing so that we all come back on and pop my video back on. There we go. Oh, look, I've got my halo going on now. Sorry about that. California sunshine for you. That was fascinating. Thank you so much, all of you. And before we sign off, and thank you so much, everyone, for keeping to time. But before we sign off, just remind people where they can see more of your work, or if they want to recommend that their guild books you for a lecture, where they can find your contact information. So let's go reverse order from last time. I think Celeste, Kim, Kellie, Leanne. So Celeste, where can people find you?
Thank you, Bea. I have a website called meerkatshweshwe.com, and you'll find everything you want to know there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
I have a website, thewackydoodlequilter.com, and again, everything, all my prices, lectures, workshops are all on the website. Thank you.
Excellent. Kellie.
You can find me everywhere. I've got a website, sillymoonquiltingco.ca. We are Canadian. And I have a YouTube channel. You can search Silly Moon Quilting Co. on YouTube, and then Instagram and Facebook as well. Silly Moon Quilting Co.
Excellent. Thank you. And Leanne.
I'm at devotedquilter.com, and I'm also on Instagram as Devoted Quilter. And on Facebook, I'm Devoted Quilter Designs because Devoted Quilter was gone.
Yes, I'm familiar with this struggle on socials. And of course, I am bburn.com. And although I wasn't talking today, I'm also online. So thank you all so much. This has been fabulous. Had great chats. And also I've been chatting on Facebook as well, where the live stream was, where we all looked fabulous. You'll be glad to know. So these shows, this is the third trunk show that we've done as part of this event. The other two are already on YouTube. Quilt and Learn has a brand new YouTube channel. So do go and catch those there. But otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Have an amazing
welcome.
day.
Thank you, Bea.
Bye.